Hey everybody, welcome to InPsightRadio. I am your host, Danielle Egnew, and you are a fly on the wall too everywhere. How are you, gang? Hi, happy podcast. I am going to dive right in here because I have a stack. Hold on. I got a giant stack of your questions here that I've been going through involving OffWorlders, involving extraterrestrials, involving ETs. And I need to get to these questions because we got a pretty packed podcast today as we talk about everything you ever wanted to know about ETs. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because we're not alone in the galaxies. We don't own the Earth. We are a group of beings that live on the Earth. It's our species' home planet. Yet there are other off-world and galactic races that have come to visit us many, many times along the way. And some of those beings are still here. They reside in cavernous areas underground, in mountain cavern areas, in the ocean, in deep lakes. They use the Earth as a giant spinning electromagnet, and they use that to open up vortexes and pop from one spot to the other throughout their space-time continuum. So we've got a lot to cover here because I'm not kidding. I have so many questions here. You guys post me really good questions too. So one of the first questions that I'm going to get to is, because this is going to kick off the topic about extraterrestrials and off-worlders, is, are there evil aliens? Question number one, are there evil aliens? Well, yes and no, okay? The construct of evil is kind of a human thing. And I'm not saying that there is not our idea of evil or darkness or nastiness in the world. There really is. And also in the galaxies. Yet when we talk about, an evil species, there are beings out there whose culture is so different from ours because they don't share our same biology, our same spirituality. They don't share our same moral code because the idea of a moral code is very different planet to planet. I mean, world to world, what holds value is very different. Now, life really does seem to hold value no matter what realm you come from throughout the galaxies. Yet, like this question says, are there evil aliens? There are ETs out there, there's off-worlders out there who definitely do have a very different idea of what their emotional outlay and emotional priorities are. So they may appear sociopathic to us, they may appear rotten and evil and angry and wretched, except the reason they're doing what they're doing is not the reason we do it. We're just looking at what they're doing and making a value judgment on it. So are there evil species? Well, maybe. I mean, I haven't met every ET race in the known universe or unknown universe. Yet the ones I've come across, no, they are not evil. There are some off-world races or extraterrestrial races who, when we look at them, are really kind of spicy. There are some out there. An example would be the Greys. Okay, and we talk about the Greys on this podcast once in a while. The Greys aren't evil, yet they do things that humans would consider were sociopathic or really creepy or wrong. And in what they're doing that's creepy and wrong, it's included but not limited to. There was a time frame when they came to Earth and they abducted humans and they tried to harvest eggs and sperms and all kinds of things. And the reason they were doing that was to attempt to reverse some genetic changes that they made to their own species. They were thinking that since we're close enough in genetic makeup, I mean, really, everybody's kind of close in genetic makeup, gang, when you look at it, especially humans. We are such a hybrid species. We carry with us so much off-world DNA within us that we think is 100% human DNA, that a lot of these beings can come down and sample platter us and try to scoop out little bits of our DNA in order to help their genetic code, in this case, the Greys, because we all have the same 4 building blocks, the universal 4 building blocks of all molecules in the third dimension, right? So the Greys weren't trying to be evil. They weren't trying to be awful. They were trying to harvest eggs and sperm because within both those mechanisms, there are opportunities for genetic copying, not just like a hair follicle, but there's opportunities for reproductive copying as well, based off of our own genetic code to undo some genetic noodling they had done to their species, which now has rendered them a dying species. I mean, the Greys are a species that are dying. Well, we call them the Greys. They don't call themselves that. However, they are related. They're relatives of the Oturan, which are the folks from Otur, which are what we like to call Arcturians in our American accents. Arcturian. But it's Oturan. And I get where people got Arcturian out of that. You have to say it like that too. Arcturian. They took our jobs. Arcturians. So that is a South Park reference in case anybody wondered what the hell I was doing there. So when we look at, are the Greys evil? No, the Greys are a hive mind. The Greys are a hybrid species that are related to the Oturan. They took themselves off-world a long time ago, kind of like a religious cult. They live off-world. They live on giant craft. And that's why they have the big bulby heads and little teeny bodies. They don't really need big, strong bodies to live in space. Not a lot of gravity up there. So it's a long story with the Greys, and I won't go into the whole thing. But the whole thing is they were trying to undo some genetic noodling that we would say was like a religious choice. Like they were trying to make the perfect race, which is a little creepy. They didn't quite get there. They needled too many of their genetics out of their code. So now they're pretty much stuck with what they got, which is it's very sad, actually. They are a dying race. They cannot reproduce inside of themselves. They grow themselves outside of themselves in potty container things. It's very Star Trek, actually. Yet they were not abducting people to be evil. They were being functional about it. And so we would say, oh, that's evil. How could you do that? How could you experiment on people? How could you do these things? We think that's evil. We look at the Nazi regime that did that to the very helpless victims in the concentration camps that were Jewish, all of the ghastly and heinous experimentation that was done on those folks. So for human beings, we look at that behavior and we're like, are you out of your mind? That is super evil. That's Dr. Evil weird. And Dr. Evil isn't even that weird. I mean, he's got bad fashion sense and a twisted pinky, but he's not drilling into people's heads or, harvesting their eggs. So I wouldn't say I've ever run across a species that was evil. I would say I've run across species, many of them, who hold very different, if you want to say ethics or morals, than human beings do, because their culture is different. And there are certain extraterrestrials out there that would remind you more of, this is a little bit over the top, but you remember Worf? Remember the Klingons on Star Trek? It's a good day to die. There are these reptilian beings that are of many genuses. They are of many races. There's not just one reptilian being. That would be like saying one human. We have Caucasian humans. We have Asian humans. We have Black humans. We have all kinds of humans. We have Native American humans. We have all kinds of different subsets of genome within being human. So there are different subsets of reptilian-looking beings. And some of them, back in the old days, kind of came down here and noodled with folks in Samaria and really were, quite honestly, they were just big galactic turds and they enslaved people and did all kinds of stuff. And we do see some reminiscent history of them in rock carvings and stone carvings in Samaria. Anything with like alligator-headed people, yeah, that's kind of what this reptilian species looked like. Shorter snout on the alligator, but they were alligator-y, kind of. So there are those beings out there that have a different value system than we do, yet I have yet to meet a completely 100% evil race. I have met some seriously bad apples in the bunch, in a couple of different off-world cousin genomes. However, I've not met an evil species. Now, that's to say they don't exist, but I've never actually interfaced with them. I'm not sure that they would do well, actually, in our third dimension, because our third dimension is supported wildly by light and high vibration. And if you're going to be evil and you're going to come to the third dimension and be evil, it's going to be really hard on you. I mean, it's going to be a hard deal. So I think there's interdimensional beings that really do fall more in what we would call the creepy category or evil category, but not necessarily our off-worlders who come here all the time. You have to remember these beings are extremely advanced in their civilizations. I mean, we as human beings, we're a really new species, gang. I mean, we've been around for a couple 100,000 years, yet some of these species, some of these races have been around for millions of years. Like the folks out in Sirius AB and whatnot, the Pleiadians, where there's many different extraterrestrial beings out in the Pleiades. There's different kinds. They have different functions. They do different stuff. Yet, just like the Greys, which are related to the Oturan, who, if you saw the Oturan, they're these tall, lanky beings, and they do have more lanky, long arms. They have the more almond-shaped heads, not the bulby big heads, but the more almond-shaped heads, skinny chins. They have angular almond-shaped eyes, not the giant bulby eyeballs, but the more angular almond-shaped eyes. Sometimes they're kind of a peach color. Sometimes they're almost a variegated green color. Starts dark and goes light to the bottom, or starts light and goes, or dark at the bottom and goes light to the head. So there's a lot of different formulas, I would say, for the way that the Oturan look. Yet, if you made them bobble-headed and short with skinny little necks, then they'd look like the Greys. The Greys would look like them. So no, I have not met evil extraterrestrials that are solely evil. So on to question number 2. Do world governments know about extraterrestrials? Heck yes, they do. Heck yes, they do. The United States works with what they call the tall whites. And the tall whites are the folks from Sirius AB. And quite honestly, they look the most like us. These are the beings that have done the most noodling genetically with human beings on the planet Earth. True story. It's kind of like Earth is like Vegas. What happens on Earth stays on Earth. So we've got a lot of hybrid species running around being human, doing our human things on the Earth. They do. They have a heavier brow. Thicker lips, heavier noses, kind of slanty foreheads that go slanted backwards. A little bit more of the backside of the skull is elevated a bit. You can see a look that the Sirius AB folks have with the skulls in Peru. You know, they've got those elongated skulls, and they were not shaped as baby skulls. I mean, you can do that. You can shape a baby's skull by binding it when they're young, and it will create a conical head. And we saw a lot of this head binding in Peru around the same time frame as we saw a lot of this head binding in Egypt. You know, Nefertiti with the long head up the back. And the reason they bound the babies' heads so that they would grow that way is so they would look more like the gods. And the gods that came from Ra, that came from the stars, the sun, those folks were from Sirius. So when you look at the big giant pharaoh statues that were carved, and some of these pharaohs they could find the mummies of, some they can't. The really, really old ones that came from the stars that came down, they were large, they were big, they were folks from Sirius. So those beings then genetically noodled with humans. And we came up with all kinds of hybrid species because of that. Yet the head binding that we find in Peru and the head binding that we find in Egypt were going on about the same time frame. So we kind of had an occupation of ETs or extraterrestrials at that time from Sirius AB, and we can see a little bit of that in those folks. So yes, of course, all governments know about extraterrestrials. France works with a section of them. my goodness, Canada works with this section of them. If you ever want to know more about world governments dealing with extraterrestrial life, then there's a really great book that I would suggest to everybody, authored by the former Minister of Defense for Canada, one of the most highly decorated Canadian officials ever. His name is the Honorable Paul Hellyer, and the book title is Light at the End of the Tunnel, A Survival Plan for the Human Species. And I believe it was, this particular paperback was came out, I believe, in 2010. However, Paul Hellyer, if you don't know who he is a pretty amazing guy. And he was a Canadian Minister of National Defense in the 1960s. So that's during the Cold War, right? And here we are back tangling with Russia all over again. Good times, good times. Man, we didn't start the fire. I mean, you could just go on and on, right? World history just repeats itself. Anyway, Paul Hellyer was responsible for, he was responsible for combining the Navy, in Canada, the Air Force, the Army, and that's what's now known as the Canadian Forces. Yet he kind of mushed them all together. So he was a big visionary guy. And he was literally the highest ranking individual that we know of. Okay. So that'd be like the highest ranking individual on paper inside of the Department of Defense for Canada. So this is like not some guy living in his mom's basement, eating only cashews and drinking almond milk and only wearing a tinfoil hat and playing only Pac-Man on an old Atari system because he feels like he's being watched through his Sony system. I mean, this is a very renowned individual, very educated individual. And honestly, the Honorable Paul Hellyer is literally the highest ranking person in all of the G8 countries to ever openly speak about OffWorlders. Seriously, and this was like, it's bizarre that he's been the only guy, this little white guy out there just talking about ETs. And he's been squeaking about ETs since the 1960s and 70s. And he talks about there being at least 4 known alien species that have been visiting Earth for thousands of years. And I would agree with that. I mean, because I've run into those guys. I've run into the Oturan. I've run into the Greys. And which really technically are different species, even though they're kind of related, but they're really different at this point. I've run into the folks from Sirius AB. I've run into folks from the Pleiades. I've skirted around the outside of some of these reptilian beings. They're not really, we really don't jive all that well. And they kind of are on a different wavelength. So I kind of stay away from them. They stay away from me. Again, I don't think they're evil. They're just a little hardcore. They're just a little, it's a good day to die. I'm like, oh, it's not a good day to die for me. They're reptilian person. So no. Anyway, though, this guy writes about all this stuff. And when he retired, okay, now you got to remember, the question is, do governments know about ETs? Heck yeah. When he retired, Paul Hellyer just blew the whistle like mad. I mean, he was the original whistleblower, okay, about all of the off-worlders and UFOs and all the phenomenon. And the fact is, this man is so renowned and he was so beloved in Canada. He was such a great guy that his testimony about these extraterrestrials being real is backed up by hundreds of other high-ranking military and political people, not just in Canada, but all over the world. And including, like, they've got official documents. When he blew the whistle, other world governments released official documents worldwide that have acknowledged the presence of UFOs. Because, I mean, if he's going to come out and say this, either the whole world has to make this very renowned, very storied, very educated person look like a nutter, which isn't really going to work because the whole world has known what integrity this man has, or you could just cough up the files that your country has stacked away that have to do with UFOs. So that's pretty much, honestly, what everybody did. And there was a whole world summit that came forward to talk about UFO disclosure in 2010. And it was kind of buried on, the D section of the newspaper back then. It was pretty crazy. So what I think is fascinating about this guy is, again, he's written a ton of books, and his last name is Hellyer, Hellyer. And the light at the end of the tunnel, a survival plan for the human species, is all about how disgusted he was, because here he is, he's trying to help everybody through the Cold War. He's trying to help everybody through the 70s and the 80s. And it's about how the human species is just, let me read you this. This is great. This book reflects the mature judgment of an author with broad experience in and out of public life. It sets out in stark and unvarnished terms most of the world's major problems. The human species is hell-bent for extinction unless we can change our attitudes and actions. And basically it goes on talking about, it says, first, the book claims that the exotic energy sources already exist. And we've talked about that on this podcast. There's all kinds of exotic energy sources that exist, but they're keeping us in non-green energy because that's a lot of money through an infrastructure that was laid in 100 years ago, through electricity and coal and nuclear power and all of these things. But anyway, it's talking about how, yes, we do have these amazing sources of energy, and we talk about that on this podcast. Then he goes on, he says, second, the money has to be found to subsidize poor nations and facilitate major change. And also, he gets on the United States, that we've been developing a U.S. shadow government at the massive underground black operation installations in Nevada and Arizona using technology borrowed from visitors from other planets. And that's actually true. We have been doing that. So, I don't know if you know this, but the United States' defense budget is trillions of dollars every year. And most of that defense budget is listed in black ops programs that even the Joint Chiefs of Staff don't have access to. Somebody does, but they don't. So anyway, this Paul Hellyer guy is cool because he goes on to talk about, in this book, the countries that are working with these 4 different extraterrestrials. So yes, absolutely positively, the world knows ETs are real and governments are working with them. And this is a quote. I just got to read you this because it says, here is some of what Paul Hellyer has to say. For more, there's this video clip on this particular website. But it's fascinating because he says, in one of the cases during the Cold War, 1961, there were about 50 UFOs in formation flying south from Russia across Europe. The Supreme Allied Commander was very concerned and was about ready to press the panic button when they turned around and went back over the North Pole. They decided to do an investigation, and they investigated for 3 years, and they decided that with absolute certainty that 4 different species at least have been visiting this planet for thousands of years. True story. I've chatted with the off-world cousins that we have, and they have backed this up, in fact. There's been a lot more activity in the past 2 decades, especially since we have invented the atomic bomb. And that's really true. We have a lot more ET activity nervously watching us thinking, oh no, the monkeys found the stack of matches next to our buried stash of TNT. Whatever are we going to do? So they do keep their eyeballs on this. He goes on to say that, we're talking about the atomic bomb. And he says, meaning the extraterrestrials, they are very concerned about that, and if we will use it again, because the whole cosmos is a unity, and it affects not just us, but other people in the cosmos. And you and we've talked about this on this podcast, gang. I've talked about how we have multiverses. I have explained how when there are explosions or big bursts of emotion in this particular planet, how that affects the multiverses. When we split atoms on a cosmic level, it sends out subatomic and subparticle waves out into different multiverses and affects them negatively. So when we're blowing off nuclear stuff or even using nuclear power, that is affecting, when we're dealing with nuclear things, we're talking about quantum physics, and we're beginning to noodle with dynamics in multiverses. So we're just like toddlers, just freaking out over here, writing on the walls and pooping our pants and taking the toothbrush out of the bathroom and sticking it down our diaper and writing drawing a tree on the wall. We can't write our name because we're a toddler, but drawing a tree on the wall in our own poo and just taking all the milk and spilling it. I mean, we are a train wreck as a species with this planet, because we just don't understand how much we affect. In part, one of the reasons that I started studying quantum physics is my discussions with our off-world cousins and them talking to me about quantum fabric and how they travel on their ships and how they communicate and how they keep each other safe. Talking with them a lot about their propulsion devices and whatnot. So do the governments know that these beings exist? Absolutely. Paul Hellyer goes on to say about the ETs, they're very much afraid that we might start using atomic weapons again, and this would be very bad for us and them also because of the same quantum fabric issue that I was just talking to you about. And then he says, many are benign and benevolent, and a few are not, just like we were talking about here. They come from various places. For a long while, I only knew about the ones that came from different star systems, the Pleiades, okay? And there are beings that come from the Pleiades. They're not all the same. Just like all humans aren't the same. He goes on to say there are extraterrestrials that come from Andromeda and ones that live in one of Saturn's moons. And it's true. All of that is true. All of that is true. Andromeda, if we go out there, that's more where we see the Oturan out there and live on one of Saturn's moons. Oh, we got our little grays out there. So he adds that the aliens are rather unimpressed with we Earthlings. And then he says, there is a federation of these people, these beings, and they have rules. And one of them is they don't interfere with our affairs unless they are invited. That's actually true. They have accepted the fact that this is our planet and we have the right to run it, but they are very concerned. They don't think that we are good stewards of our planet. We are ruining our planet. We're doing all sorts of things that we shouldn't be doing, and they don't like that. They've made it clear, and they have given us a warning, claims ex-Canadian National Minister of Defense. And I'll just wrap it up with this. He says, decades ago, visitors from other planets warned us about the direction we were heading and offered to help. Instead, some of us interpreted their visits as a threat and decided to shoot first and ask questions later. It is ironic that the U.S. should be fighting monstrously expensive wars, allegedly to bring democracy to those countries, when it itself can no longer claim to be called a democracy. He's talking about the stuff that I've seen through the ethers. Oh my God. To be called a democracy when trillions, and I mean thousands of billions of dollars have been spent on black projects. Thank you, Paul Hellyer. Which both Congress and the Commander-in-Chief have been kept deliberately in the dark, declared Hellyer. So if you want to know about world governments knowing things about ETs, look up Paul Hellyer, Hellyer, and check out his books, The Light at the End of the Tunnel. He's got so many different books, lots and lots and lots out there. But yeah, they do know. And we are, continually reverse engineering UFOs, which goes to our next question. Has the United States military built craft that have been mistaken for unidentified flying objects? The answer is yes. And we just heard from Paul Hellyer. Yes, actually. Yeah, the answer is yes. And if you see something in the sky that's a triangle, that belongs to us. If you see an orb or a cigar-shaped thing or the circle shapes we have a really hard time manufacturing, we will manufacture for the sake of engineering hard angles, like triangles, squares sometimes. However, I have seen square craft that are not from here. So the angular craft, though, the triangles are ours, especially if they're black, because we love black. We have to blend in with the sky to be super sneaky. And we do have some anti-gravity technology here. So yeah, we reverse engineer UFOs all the time. And there are many, many ETs that are not happy with the fact that, obviously, as you heard from Mr. Hellyer also, that's a hard word to say, Hellyer, that our off-world cousins are not happy with our management of the Earth. However, even though we are reverse engineering their technology and we do have some command over exotic matter, we are not allowing that to be in our consumer sector. So, yes, the military, not our conventional military though, not like the Navy and the Army. These are, as Mr. Hellyer confirmed for us, these are black book programs, black ops programs, where the United States government doesn't really have a whole lot of say. And they kind of operate in big money, they operate in big science, and they kind of do what they want with taxpayer money. It's kind of a messed up situation. So yes, I would say the military, I'd say a version of our military is working. It's not even our military. A version of our government is spending money making these craft. That is a true story. Let's see what else we got here. You guys, good questions. Danielle, I read in your book that you have been abducted or an attempt was made to abduct you. That is actually true. Abduct you. Would you explain this experience in more detail? I believe I may have been abducted and would like to know more about the experience. Well, I put a lot of that detail in the book, and the book is in my book. It's in True Tales of the Truly Weird. I have about 4 chapters on weird ET stuff in there. And one abduction attempt, to my knowledge, was not successful. The other one, I think it was. They had me pretty duped. And I explained a lot in the book. I think the only thing I really didn't add is that I indeed was, I believe, abducted. They tried one time and they did fail. Yet I believe it also left me with a really interesting ability to detect whenever these craft are coming. And one of the things that is interesting is I've got sort of like a UFO sensitivity at this point in my life, is what I would call it. And so I would love to give you more detail, yet I really went into that a lot in the book. Yet a lot, I think what I'm reading the impression in the words here of this question, and I believe what you're asking is actually more about how can you tell if you've been abducted? I think that's actually the question. And I could tell you that a lot of people who have been abducted have some similar symptoms, okay? They feel like somebody is watching them. A lot of abductees don't like to have open curtains at night. I mean, a lot of us don't, come on. But I mean, they don't like that idea that somebody could be looking at them through the window that they cannot see in the dark. A lot of people who've been abducted are afraid to go to sleep because they will come if they're going to transmit a person either. Well, I say transmit because sometimes the abduction isn't physical. Sometimes they have this way of separating the person's spirit from their body. I mean, they leave us hooked up to our body, otherwise we'd be dead, right? So we've got this cord from our spirit to our body. This is just giant brushstrokes, but for the sake of time. And they pull up the spirit and they scan and evaluate us spiritually. And the reason they do this is because a lot of our off-world cousins, and they are our cousins, we have a lot of DNA in our human body that comes from our off-world cousins. We call it human DNA, yet if we were to run their DNA, we're going to see a lot of markers that are really, really similar. The protein in our eyeballs is one of them. It's a protein that doesn't match the rest of our body. I mean, I could go on and on. However, in answering to this question, you can kind of tell if you've had abduction experiences because there are irrational fears oftentimes around going to sleep. Again, around having nighttime windows, the curtains not pulled or the shades not pulled over the glass. People will also talk about wanting to sleep with their back against a wall. They'll push their bed into a corner where the bed is snugged up against the wall. I slept with my bed against a wall for a long time until the second abduction attempt actually played out on the wall I was sleeping against. And so that I just kind of was like, well, forget it. All right. This apparently, the wall isn't going to save me from dimension bending off-worlders. So, oh well. So if you think you might have been abducted, it's not always a bad thing. We can be visited. We can have our spirits scanned. Not everybody is being lifted out of their bed and taken somewhere and having organs harvested. There are forms of abduction where that does happen. A lot of times they are evaluating our emotions because they're fascinated with how we can be individuals on this planet yet be Bluetoothed together to the planet. And they're also fascinated by the fact that we are built as human beings to be Bluetoothed to this planet and to be Bluetoothed to one another. Yet we continually tell ourselves that we are separate, or there is no God, or no one's listening to us, or there are no angels. They're fascinated by how we are a receiving and sending radio antenna and have no idea that we are. That's really fascinating to them. They're also fascinated by the fact that we're this ball of chemistry wandering around, and it's the chemistry that connects the spirit to the body, because a lot of our off-world friends don't have the same physiology we do by any stretch of the imagination. We can't even ride in a lot of the craft they have unless they surround us in some sort of artificial hull, because our physiology would not be able to accommodate the space-time bending that happens when these craft jump through wormholes. Our off-world cousins have physiologies that have evolved over millions of years to be able to have command over their particle matter. So as they go to warp 10, go through a wormhole, they work with their ships. Their ships aren't biological, yet they have a biological interface where the cellular structure of these beings, they're able to augment their cellular structure to not get crushed by space-time. You know, one of the things that my friends from Sirius AB, when I said, hey, could I ever jump on a ship and go somewhere with you? And could I go to these different places? And they said, well, you could, but we'd basically have to wrap you up in this special little pod thing. Otherwise, you're going to explode. I'm like, what do you mean I'm going to explode? They're like, blow up. And they're showing me like images of a watermelon being hit by a giant semi-truck, or a hamster in a microwave, or just a horrible thing. Sometimes the folks from Sirius AB are a little on point, okay? I'm like, ow, ew. So having that feeling of just exploding because our physiology could not withstand the rip in space-time, and we don't have the right kind of technology to take us to protect our physiology either. So a lot of people who have abduction fears, that you might be afraid of flying. I know a lot of people who are afraid of flying who have been abducted, because there is a helplessness, especially if your physical body was taken up and put back. There is a helplessness to the levitation and the flying off and all the things. So I'm not saying if you have a fear of flying, you absolutely positively have been abducted by aliens. I'm simply saying that if, like the person who asked this question, wanting to know more about, if you could get into more, this person thinks they may have been abducted, getting into more detail. If you have odd fears surrounding, usually these ETs that would abduct somebody in an abrupt way, like the Greys, or there are a few of them out there. There's a few of our, I'll call them reptilian folks who do a little of that here and there in not such a nice way. If that's been the experience, and there's going to be a lot of fear even watching movies where aliens are abducting people or working on people. I mean, almost a trauma response. If you watch a movie like Fire in the Sky, where you see some of these Hollywood's interpretation of what these aliens, these sociopathic aliens would be doing to people in a spaceship. It's normal to be way creeped out by all of that, okay? If you're watching that and you feel a trauma response to that, like you start shaking, you start sweating, you start crying, you just can't handle it, you have to turn the show off, that's hitting a spot within that is letting you know that you may have had a similar circumstance, even if it didn't happen like Hollywood projected it, because a lot of times you have to remember, gang, Hollywood is showing aliens do what really demented humans would do to one another, all right? So our ET folks, they're not human, so they're not going to have that same ultra creepy approach. However, they do some odd things sometimes, and sometimes they're creepy. The reason that we haven't heard much about alien abduction since 1970 was because the Greys stopped doing it. They'd been harvesting genome from the human species really since the 1930s. And I'll give you one guess, 1930s. I'll give you one guess. Which world government was working with the Greys? You guessed it. Adolf Hitler's Germany. That is correct. They were swapping, quote, permissions to abduct people for technology. And later on, there's this thing called the Greada Treaty that was authored in the 1960s that went through presidential administrations that supposedly was a treaty that was seen by military officials who have talked about the treaty. And this treaty was between the United States and ETs in the 1960s, saying, well, you can abduct a few of our people, but you have to tell us who it is, and you have to tell us why you're doing it, and you only get to abduct so many in exchange for technological advances. So you can research that, GREADA, GREADA treaty. That's in my book too. However, if you have trauma surrounding odd nighttime events, and you were not somebody who, obviously had to endure abuse from parents or siblings or something in the evening, then it is likely you may have something floating around in terms of having been abducted. Now, I'm just not talking about night terrors or freaky feelings or ghosts that you feel are looking at you. It's a very specific feeling when you have abduction fear. And I can speak from that feeling. I'm not afraid to be abducted by these beings. I'm not. However, there is an eeriness that can fill a room that's different than that weird feeling of a ghost looking at you from the corner. That's just freaking creepy and kind of scary. Eerie is how I would describe the ET feeling. It's just weird. Like the air gets weird because what's happening is they are augmenting space-time around your bed. So it feels weird. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps even thinking about it. Ew. So just know the ghosty look at you is different than there's ETs in your room going to abduct you. And gang, listen. It's very rare to be abducted by an alien, all right? So I don't want to scare anybody here. And generally, before we even experience that, before we even hit this world, before we hit this earth, we will kind of talk to these beings like we do the people that we're going to meet in our lifetime in the green room in heaven before we're born. And a lot of times, if these beings are coming around to noodle with us or most of the time they're examining our physiology. That's what they're doing most of the time. But what they really are studying is how our spirit is hooked up to the earth, to God, to higher power, and to our brain. So again, most of them are not harvesting eggs and sperm. They are studying how our spirit connects to our body. And so if you're finding that you have fears in this area, do know that the Greys stopped abducting people in the early 1970s. They stopped because they had been trying since 1930 to retroactively insert human DNA back into their DNA chain. Parts of our human DNA, not the whole thing. So that they could have fertility back, so that they would have health back. They have a bunch of fertility issues with that species because they've taken out too much of their genetic code scientifically trying to make the perfect species. I mean, it's really sad, actually, if you think about it. But as soon as the Greys figured out that there was nothing in our genome that they could use, and it took them many decades because there's a lot to human genome, they quit abducting us. Bingo. They were done. They moved on and kind of accepted their fate. So we were kind of one of their very last big chances because we hold so much weird DNA that's off-worlder in our human DNA that we think is only human DNA. I mean, this is such a big topic that I talk a little about ETs. I don't get into it as much. And I've had a lot of people say, please write books on this. Please write books on this. And I probably should. I don't know. Got to get through my album first, and then we'll work on the ET books. So yes, if you do suspect that you might have been abducted by ETs, sometimes just a nice little nightlight. I know it sounds like we're all 5, okay, but it's okay. It's okay to be afraid, gang. I mean, sometimes a little light is not a bad thing. You know, a little salt lamp or something that also really makes it harder for the ethers in the room to change. And salt lamps affect a lot of EMF contamination. So just a little salt lamp glow in the corner, just so you know you're on Earth and everything's fine. Okay, on to the next question. This is an interesting one. I think I may have been an alien in another lifetime. Is that possible? Yes, majorly. As a matter of fact, human beings on this planet generally came as beings from other planets. This is a highly chaotic place. And it doesn't make much sense for a spirit to come down here and live their first life on Earth. I mean, we have multiverses that affect this planet. We affect multiverses. There are huge amounts of variance here. You're stuck into a body where your spirit has got to learn to communicate to the body through a system of chemistry, through the electromagnetic system and the electrical system of the body. And then you've got to have your entire past life memory wiped away before you get dropped in your body and kind of start from scratch every single lifetime. At the same time that you are generally born in, if you're anywhere from the modern world forward, you're born into this, especially in America, this odd sociopathic system that wants to create consumer culture and addictive need as the god. So you are told repeatedly that you don't have psychic abilities. There's no such thing as aliens. The only thing that is real is the news on your phone. And you better stay at that job for 5,000 years until you die. I mean, you're gaslit into oblivion if you try to talk about any larger culture or spiritual awareness. So if that's your first lifetime as a being, that's going to twist you so sideways, man. Nobody does their first life on Earth. Are you kidding me? This is where you come if you are the 0.001% adrenaline junkie, okay? Earth is where you go if you're the Navy SEAL of spirits that want to help out in a cross-dimensional way, because everything we do on Earth affects multiverses. Everything everybody does on planets affect multiverses. We just happen to affect a lot of them because of the physics of the planet, which is why we have a lot of ETs that hang out here, coming and going, using it like LAX in between London Heathrow and, I don't know, name another really far away airport. Okay, so that's why they're here. So yes, it is highly probable that not everybody, but most people who are here, especially in our recent time frame, maybe not so much back in the day when we were still living as indigenous people with the planet. I think we had a lot more indigenous souls that just came and repeated themselves and had a little fun there. Yet in our modern world, we're receiving a lot of beings who are surfing in from other cultures, the Pleiades being one of them. We got a lot of Pleiadians wandering about. Now, when I say this, note that we're talking spirit, okay? Everybody gets issued the same human issue meat suit down here on planet Earth. Even Jesus got one. And you have to chew your food and you pee and you poo. You know, if you're female and you want to have kids, you give birth. We all know where the baby comes out. I mean, there are very physical portions and rules to being in this planet. However, your spirit can have spent lifetimes on as an Oturan being, or lifetimes as someone from the Pleiades, or lifetimes from Sirius. And we're seeing a lot of starseeds, they're called, people coming in who have spent a majority of their lifetimes off-world, surfing in so that we can raise the consciousness and vibration of this planet. Because if you have spent a majority of your time on Otur, then you're going to come in and you're going to have this amazing desire to be telepathically connected to everybody, to not need money, to share, to uplift. All beings, all life is precious. You're probably going to gravitate towards Buddhism or Taoism. There's going to be a whole different outlook that these beings who come in from Otur are going to have. And then they're going to be affecting our world differently while wearing their human flesh suit. All right. So I think it's kind of interesting that, yes, I highly would tell this person who wrote this, I believe very much that we can come in from other places, and many of us do. I've been asked where I came from. I don't know. Gang, I don't know where I came from. I don't have that information on myself, sorry to say. However, I am really fascinated by star travel, so I can tell you that. So when I look at the beings with this, this person's asking, is it possible? Could I be from somewhere else? Is it possible that other people are living human lives, having been spirits on other planet? 100%. 100%. We're seeing a lot of kids coming in that are coming right straight from Sirius AB. They're coming right straight from the Pleiades. And we're getting them, as I call, first generation pioneers in a flesh suit down here. And a lot of these children are being labeled as being on the spectrum. They're very literal. They don't really understand emotional cues. They don't really get our need to pussyfoot around issues. Let's just get to it and get on. They're very emotional, yet not in the same way that a standard person in a standard flesh suit can choose to be emotional. They love very fiercely, yet it has a different set of parameters for the love. Very creative, beyond brilliant, off the charts brilliant. We're seeing a lot of these kids right now. And I'm not saying that there is not, yes, autism is a thing. Yes, it is a medical, there are medical causes. There are medical definitions. Yet a lot of what I'm seeing are these spirit beings coming in, and even maybe it's not as much of a neurodiversity. Maybe it's a spiritual diversity, and it's affecting the neurodiversity. So you know what came first, the chicken or the egg there? And you got to keep in mind, gang, this isn't all people who would be neurodiverse or on the spectrum. All apples are fruits. All fruits are not apples. Yet, yes, in answer to your question, yes, we have a lot of extraterrestrial souls coming in and choosing a human life. And that actually goes to the next question here. I feel I am a starseed. If I am a starseed, does that make me an off-worlder or does that make me a human? Technically speaking, gang, if you're wearing the meat suit, welcome to humanity. You are a human being. It doesn't mean you don't have all kinds of interesting experiences other places. Yet, gang, if we're wearing a meat suit, we're a human being. All right? You might have been a human being that surfed in from some amazing places in former lifetimes. But the point is to be human. That's why you're here. If you're a starseed and you're listening to this and you struggle with the idea of being human, and you relate so much more with going off into space or wanting the mothership to come get you, or this place feels like a weird, bad biker bar that you accidentally ended up in after a really creepy binge in Vegas, and now you were out with your friends, and now for some reason you're in some limousine of somebody else's bachelorette party. You've never even met them, and now you're on the 15 in Needles, and you have no idea at all where biker bar grossness you've come into. But the fact of the matter is, there you are, doing body shots of a guy named Ringo out of his armpit that tastes like the bottom end of a cactus had sex with a cat butt. Okay? So if you feel like Earth is that experience for you, then I would tell you I'm super sorry. I know I can be complicated here. Yet understand you chose to come here to be human. You chose the human experience to help the humans, starseeds. And believe me, here's one thing I can guarantee you about being human. Ladies and gentlemen, you too will die. That's correct. Every one of us will be hitting a wall of death, going on to the great hereafter, where all of your accommodations, including all-inclusive food, beverage, and hotel stays, are taken care of indefinitely. So just don't worry about your time here. It's not permanent. Starseeds, you have chosen to be part of this planet. You've chosen it because you came here to help. You came here to experience what it is to be a soul, a little spark of energy, living in this meat suit, communicating with the electromagnetic chemically released chemicals in your brain through arcs of electricity in order to make your hands move and in order to affect the world. You came here specifically to understand what it is to be so heavily Bluetoothed to a planet and with one another. That's why you came here. And so, yes, you are human. You are human with extraordinary spiritual experiences. And you came here for a reason, starseeds. So I sincerely hope that you do your best to try to not see it as the gross biker bar in Needles, which is a city in California, by the way. So I'm hoping that starseeds out there accept your humanity, accept that you surfed in from somewhere else, roll up your sleeves, and let's all help make this incarnation amazing. That is why you are here. Okay, so I am being made aware of the time. My crew is making me aware of the time here. And I want to get to, oh, geez, we only have time for one more question. Are you kidding me with this? All right. That's all right. That's all right. We'll cover this in these other questions in further podcasts. Yet this is a really good question. Is it possible for me to see extraterrestrials? And if so, how? I would like to communicate with them. Okay, it's totally possible. In the same way that we see our angels, okay? Extraterrestrial species, our off-world cousins, a lot of them exist in a very light frequency. A few of them don't. There is a few butulicious species out there that we don't really interface with all that much. They don't interface with us because they get in trouble if they try to subjugate us. They get in trouble with their peeps. Just like Paul Hellyer said, there's a little council, a little galactic council out there that keeps everything on the up and up. However, a lot of our extraterrestrial friends, you can call them in psychologically, you can call them in mentally, you call them in with your heart. And you can do this by just sitting out in a big field. You can do this in a city and open up your heart and proceed your request with, I invoke the law of love. And you throw out a star map, you throw out a Google map, you show where you are in the United States on the globe, and then to the planet, and then to the state, and then to the city, and then in the city where the map would be, and just zoom right down in on yourself. And I will tell you, be a little careful asking folks from Sirius AB to come visit you. They may interpret it as come get me. And that can get really odd. I had a miscommunication with the folks from Sirius one time about that, and it just got strange. So I would tell you that for you to be able to envision these beings and just say, I would love to see you in the sky, and I would love to send you some love. And can you just show up and send me love? And you just stay really calm and just watch the sky. What it'll look like is if you watch the same patch of sky, it'll look like a star just starts to fade in and then gets really bright that wasn't there before. And sometimes the fade in looks a little bit purpley when it's fading in. That's actually a dimensional barrier. You're watching this craft come through a dimensional barrier, and it will literally bend space-time. It bends light. So the frequency of the light changes. So we see that purple color coming in there as the light is filtered through that particular dimension. So it'll phase in. It becomes a real bright orb up there. And a lot of times it may move like just a little bit. It may make a right angle. It may just kind of float off to the side. It may just sit there. And when you see it, say hi. Hi. And it'll just kind of fade out from where it came from and go. Sometimes it'll just take right off across the sky. Like somebody just flicked it with your finger. It'll just go ping right to the right or right over your head. Yet that's a great way to do it. There's a terrific app called CE5, Close Encounters 5. I think you download it for like $10. And that app is put out by Dr. Stephen Greer, who has done a ton of work in the ufology community. It's always interesting when you look up people who have done ufology work and really got big sensitive stuff out there. There's all these articles about Paul Hellyer. He's a phony and a fraud, and Dr. Stephen Greer is a phony and a fraud. I'm like, oh my goodness, you guys. Too many government officials have come out and corroborated their stories, so just let it be. Anyway, Dr. Stephen Greer has a really interesting documentary. And it's fascinating, and it's called Unacknowledged. He also has one called Sirius, as in the star, Sirius. So you can take a look at those, and you'll hear from all kinds of former military officials and people who talk about ETs and all kinds of things that come forward. So it is very fascinating. It's fascinating stuff. So anyway, I'm being flagged down and being let know that we are right on top of our hour. And I'm excited because I think that this put us in some really interesting territory here, talking about off-worlders. We're definitely not alone. And if you want to talk these off-world beings, you absolutely can. If you start to get scared, if they show up in your meditations or whatnot, again, just saying, I invoke the law of love. That is a universal code for, okay, I don't know what we're doing, but I'm kind of weirded out. And it's kind of it's a call for assistance. It's a call to back off. It's a lot of different things. It's kind of like the F-bomb. It means many things. It's a noun, it's a verb, it's an adjective, it's how you feel. It's all kinds of things. So I would just tell you that the CE5 app does have some meditation techniques that you can use. And yes, you can get a hold of ETs that way. Also, many of us have extraterrestrial guides that show up. And I have, as a matter of fact, I've very recently, just released it was a call for folks who would like to have their angels painted. I do this thing where I will paint people's guides or angels, and I only have time to do 7 paintings right now, and 4 of those 7 spots have already sold out. Yet what's cool about that is being able to actually look at these beings that present themselves. And sometimes I get off-worlders that come forward. And these are, of course, the primary beings that are supporting this individual, spiritually speaking. And generally, it's an angel, your primary angel that comes forward. So I'll paint this angel. Why I'm even bringing this up is it's so cool because sometimes I get people's extraterrestrial guides that will come forward. And generally, it's angels. It's the angel that wants to present itself. But it's always fun when you get some ETs that come forward. And I've had a couple of paintings with these extraterrestrial beings that will come forward. It is so interesting. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so fascinating. It's cool. It's cool. The point being is that we do have extraterrestrial guides and we can contact them. Some of us do. And we can contact them. And even if you don't have guides, you can reach out to our extraterrestrial community because here's the takeaway. Our off-world cousins want to help us. Our off-world cousins are a little disgusted by our governmental systems that want to keep us in very antiquated systems of dirty energy and lack and limitation. And it's very hard for them to watch this happen, but they can't, it's the prime directive. They can't really interfere. However, they can't interfere with world governments. That doesn't mean that you and I can't chat with them and get some really great tips and develop our own technologies and do our own thing. I chat with them all the time about propulsion mechanisms. And I'm a big physics weirdo anyway. I love science. So I have fun having big conversations with the folks from Sirius AB about what we call antimatter or dark matter and what it is and how we can activate it and all the things. And of course, yes, we have big black book, dark shadow government, insert Darth Vader's walk-in theme, da 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 da. Kind of programs out there developing all this too. Mwah. But guess what, man? Go out there, meditate, let an ET tell you how to build an exotic matter engine, run your house off of the existing matter that Tesla knew was there. I mean, we can reach out to these beings and we still can be inspired by their technologies through our dreams, through our inspirations, through our meditations. They're not gods, they're not angels, they're just our off-world cousins who are a little more developed than we are in terms of living with the universe. And they love to help us, and we as people can certainly ask for that help. So, just do what makes you feel comfortable. Make what makes you feel comfortable, everybody. I love these Everything You Want to Know About podcasts. I love answering your questions, gang. And if you have other questions that you'd like to pose to me, go ahead and put them in the comments of this podcast, okay? And we will take a look at those questions. Maybe we can formulate a podcast around those questions if we get enough of the same type of question. I always like to see where your heads are at and where your spirits are at and where your hearts are at. So thanks, everybody. Go look at the stars. Have fun picking out the satellites versus the UFOs because there's a ton of off-world craft being piloted right above us. Have fun. Have fun with our off-world cousins. And I will see you next podcast.